My name's Andrew Armstrong. I'm the city archaeologist at Gloucester City Council. I'm on site today at King's Square in the centre of Gloucester, where the improvement works are carrying on apace in the square behind me. As part of these works, we've had a small amount of archaeological work going on as well. We put out a video about a week ago on what we were finding, and today we're going to give an update on those findings. So we're in the eastern corner of King's Square now, between the old Chambers pub and the subway, near the exit of King's Square, where you then walk out towards the bus station. And the hole we're in now is about 2 metres below current ground level. So what we're going to do now is look at the remains the archaeologists have found in this corner of the site. So what the groundworks have exposed here are two very sizable walls. The one in front of me here, and then one to my right just here. Now these are both, well, certainly the one we fully exposed is about 80 centimetres wide. It's mortared with lime mortar, and the stones used in its construction are probably about 1 foot long generally. So it's a sizable construction, not as big as the main city walls, but still a very substantial structure. And we assume that this wall is part of the same structure, but we don't know for sure yet. We're going to have to establish whether or not this abuts this wall, whether it's the same date or whether it's built at a different time. And what I'm stood on here, by the way, is a 1970 sewer pipe, which really isn't very interesting. So both of these walls, we are content, are of Roman date. They've been found in association with lots of Roman material, and they would fit Roman construction very nicely. As I say, they're about 2 metres below ground level, which is actually quite shallow for Roman remains in Gloucester. But we do find Roman structural remains near the walls tend to be a bit shallower, so that would fit. Now, what are these walls? What do they represent? Well, when we first found the wall in front of us here in about a week and a half ago, I was fairly happy this must be part of a Roman internal tower, and I still think that might well be the case. I have to say though, it's slightly off to one side for it to be a Roman internal tower, so if it is, it's on a slightly different design or layout to one we found previously in Greyfriars. This wall is in the right place, but it's in the right place for the external wall of a Roman corner tower. And when I say corner tower, I mean that we've got one Roman city wall running under subways to my left, another Roman city wall at right angles to it running underneath the Chambers pub to my right. And the corner towers that we have found in Gloucester are at 45 degrees to those walls, and they extend inwards. And they're one of a whole system of towers we find dotted along the walls of the city. So we can't fully interpret it yet, but we're confident it's a Roman structure, it's linked to the walls, but it might be slightly different to what we found elsewhere. So what's going to happen next? Well, the developers on the site need to remove this sewer pipe, and when that comes out, they're going to need to put in a drain to connect to the main sewers over off to my left. And that's going to require the excavation, the removal of small parts of the walls on either side by an archaeologist. And at the same time, we're going to excavate down beneath this sewer pipe to see if we can find where these two walls meet, and therefore we can potentially work out how they relate to each other. So there's still a bit more work left to do, but it's going very well. So here are some of the artefacts found by the archaeologists on site. This doesn't look very prepossessing, but this is actually part of a Roman roof tile. And this is a very common find in Gloucester. We find tons of these throughout the Roman city, and these were actually all produced in what is now St Oswald's Priory. In the Roman period, there was actually a Roman tilery on that site, which has been found by archaeologists. This is the rim from an amphora, which is basically a large storage jar, and that would be used to store foodstuffs of any particular type. Here, a rather beautiful fragment of glass, which we are confident is Roman glass. It's the right colour, it's got the blue-green colour we associate with Roman glass, and it has also gone opaque in exposure to oxygen, which also happens with Roman glass when it's excavated for the first time. Here we have the rim of a really beautiful piece of pottery. You can see it's decorated there. And this type of red pottery is known as Séminois, and it's produced in southern France. And usually this is the best that we find, but the archaeologist on site has done a really good job, and he's managed to successfully excavate this rather beautiful, much larger fragment of a pottery vessel. And this one, hopefully you can see, is rather beautifully decorated with figures, figures stood above what's either the head of a Medusa or a Gorgon, with geometric patterns, with figures that might be dancing, and potentially also with the name of the potter itself. A really beautiful artefact, and there will be specialists who will be able to tell us more or less exactly where that was made. A question I get asked very often in Gloucester is why, when we find archaeological remains like this, can't we display them to the general public permanently? And that's a really good question, but there are actually a lot of reasons why we struggle to do that. Remains like this are really very common in Gloucester. It's a Roman city, and there are stone Roman buildings surviving throughout the city centre. It simply isn't practical to expose all of them for public display when we come across them. Secondly, we very rarely plan to come across these things. We usually find them in the middle of a development, and that development will have planning permission and will be in progress. So in this case, we have the redevelopment of King Square, which needs a sewer connection, and we have come across a Roman structure. We had no way of knowing this Roman structure survived beforehand, so we couldn't plan for it beforehand. And to stop a development like this in its tracks, and then to try and find the funding and the planning permissions and the arrangement to display these remains would be exceptionally difficult. Also, frankly, the planning system doesn't allow us to. If a private developer comes down, finds archaeological remains on their site when they're building, they're required to protect them, they're required to record them, absolutely, but they are not required to change their development to display those remains. It does sometimes happen, but the City Council has no power to require them to do that. Finally, I'd also say the nature of the archaeological remains doesn't always lend themselves to being displayed. These Roman remains have been cut through by 2 sewer pipes and an absolutely massive subway to my right here. So the remains that are left are therefore fragmentary. They're not going to be brilliantly easy to understand, and they're not necessarily going to look brilliantly impressive on display. Also, there's the levels. We haven't even reached the floor level of this Roman building in front of me. It's going down for at least 1 metre. It probably extends down for another metre or half a metre below that. So we're getting on to 3 or 4 metres below ground level before these remains can be displayed. And you imagine the cost of excavating that and displaying it. The practicalities are very difficult, and it simply isn't achievable in a lot of situations. The role of the City Council in the planning process in Gloucester is really to protect these remains, to conserve them in situ when we can. That means just leaving them alone so that they're available for future generations. Now, when we do find them, when we can investigate them, we do that and we try and make you aware of it. But it simply isn't possible to permanently display them in a lot of cases. Thank you very much for watching this video. We'll try and keep you updated with any new information we find about this site, so do keep an eye on our social media.